Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, I'm your host, Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Annett, and she's going to tell us her story today. Annett, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Annett Garvik, and I'm from Norway. I live in a city called Bergen, which by Norwegian standard is quite a large city, by the world standard, quite small.
Can you tell us about your disability and how it affects you day to day?
I use a wheelchair, but I can also stand and walk a little bit. I have an underlying neurological disease, and I also have I fell off a horse when I was young, so that made some issues because people, when I think spinal cord injury, people think people who have like paralyzed. I'm not paralyzed, but I have a spinal cord injury, which is often misunderstood. Yeah. Because then people think, oh, you have to be like totally paralyzed, and that's not the way it is. Yeah. So I'm the very unlucky or very lucky person to win like several complicated issues, but I think that's very often the case for many of us who are disabled.
Was your injury before or after your...
Before, when I was like 15, 16. Yeah. Yeah. And then also combined with my gene stuff, it was kind of very unlucky.
So can you tell us about your journey to getting pregnant? Did you have any questions about that in relation to your disability when that came up?
The process was because I was trying to think about how my journey towards getting pregnant was, and it was kind of a very long one because when I was young, I was told by my then doctor that I shouldn't get pregnant because it could be very dangerous to me and the fetus inside me. So then I was like, okay, I'm never going to get pregnant. And it was kind of a mourning process because I didn't know that I wanted a children because I was like in my early 20s. I think I was 22 or something. So that was not fun at all. But then over the years, and then when I met my husband, I kind of questioned the doctors why they said what they said. So I tried to actually research a little bit, and I tried to get information, and I tried actually to go to the hospital where I belong, which is the second largest maternity kind of obstetrician department in Norway, actually, is where I belong here. And I waited a year for the appointment, and when I came there, he couldn't answer me anything. He couldn't give me any answer at all towards my disability. And because of I have a tendency to faint. So the doctor was very concerned about that because the first diagnosis I got actually in the United States was actually POTS, which is now very common with people with long COVID and stuff. But I lost that diagnosis when I came back to Norway because my symptoms are kind of, so I don't even fit in there. So that's lucky me. But they were more concerned about my fainting and how I was able to take care of a child than how the pregnancy and everything would be. And I understand their concern, but also I have a husband and we were going to do this together. And I had like my wheelchair, my AIDS, and I've lived with this condition for a very long time. So I know a lot about how to handle stuff, but they never asked me about that. It was a very hard decision to take to try to get pregnant. And then we didn't get pregnant. And because of my condition, they were not willing to give me IVF or anything like that. That was out of the question because of my disability. and also like other kind of medicines and stuff. So that was like, no. So that was kind of hard. Like I kind of understand the system, but at the same time, it was kind of tough. And it was really hard. It was some really tough years, actually, because all my friends got pregnant and everybody expected me to not get pregnant. Everybody was kind of expecting me not. Like I was kind of just expected to never get pregnant, never have a family or whatever. And it was kind of, nobody ever asked me the questions. But they asked my husband, like friends of him and stuff, but not me. And then when we were kind of coming to terms with not having children, because growing up, I never wanted to birth my own children necessarily. I wanted to have children, but I wanted to adopt and stuff like that. And I know there are a lot of discussion about adoption and stuff like no, but that was kind of what I wanted growing up. But when you have a disability, you can't adopt and you can't become a foster mom either. All those options are closed to you when you have a disability. So becoming a mom, my only option was actually getting pregnant myself. So, and then suddenly when we were kind of, okay, this is not going to happen, I was pregnant. So it took me a while before I discovered I was pregnant because I didn't think that was going to be an option at that point. So my husband got into a bit of a shock and I was we were kind of thrown into a loop, both of us. It was a very interesting time because in the end, I ended up not telling so many. I either texted or took it over the phone or let my husband tell people because I was afraid of the reaction of others. So that a time that was supposed to be a very joyful time wasn't necessarily that. Like I told a friend of mine she was pregnant at the same time and she said, "Oh, how did this happen?" And I was like, "How do you think it happened?" So yeah, I ended up not like my in-laws. I let my husband tell them and I was not in room because I was so afraid of their reaction. They were thrilled. They were kind of over the moon, so that was not a problem at all. But I was so afraid of how I was going to be met by them, if they were going to be happy. And when you're pregnant, especially like you are a bit raw and the hormones are a thing with the doctors and everything. I think I was sent to the hospital for closer follow-ups and stuff. They were really good. The only thing, I met a new doctor each time, so I had to kind of explain myself each time. So that was kind of not so fun because my bum didn't grow at the speed it was supposed. I was sent to extra checkups and they were kind of very thorough in that respect. And I'm not a fan of hospitals or doctors or anything like that, but I met the nicest doctors during that time. Some of them not so much. Again, they're people. So I met one who was kind of, but she was not mean towards me. She was mean toward her colleague, which she was saying that he had misinterpreted some fact about the baby size because they said I had a huge baby inside of me. It turned out when he was born, he was just exact at like the, he was in the middle. Like he was not big, he was not small, he was just, but yeah, it was an interesting time because it was, yeah, there was a lot of thing going on. But I was very lucky because of like many who has I can't say that word, neurological diseases and stuff. Some of us get better during the pregnancy. And I was one of them. So, well, in the second part, not in the end. Towards the end, I got really, really, really sick. But in the middle, I was really doing great. At the end, when I got sick, I didn't get like dangerously sick. I just got really unwell and couldn't do anything. So not sick in a like dangerous zone or anything like that. Just sick as couldn't do much.
Mhm. So what were the doctor's opinion when you first told them like you were pregnant? Was there any apprehension since there was apprehension before? Was there any questions or anything like that?
I think they were more like, okay, now she's pregnant, can't do anything about it, so we just have to try to. But the weird thing was, like, I met so many different doctors, and then I had a follow-up with a midwife and my GP. So I had one, like you have in Norway, it's kind of a system where you can either choose to go to a midwife during your follow-ups or to your GP. And I chose something in between. So I went to a midwife one time and then to the doctor next time because of my medical issues. Otherwise, I would chosen just midwife. And the doctor, she was very neutral. So that was good. So she didn't say anything, and they were kind of very, so they were just doing, and I had to go into an early ultrasound to see if everything was okay. So they followed through really. They were really, really good to, like, all the scans and everything. They were really checking well up on me and the baby growing inside me. So I felt really well cared for. They didn't really know much about my condition and stuff, so that wasn't a problem. And also during my pregnancy was when a neurologist told me that my condition was, in fact, a neuro one, and that probably I could kind of, like, my baby could inherit it. Before that, I was told it was because of the fall of the horse and stuff like that. So it was more of injury. Now I was told, okay, that, but also you have an underlying neurological condition. And that I got told during the pregnancy. So that was interesting. But at that time, I was pregnant, so I couldn't change anything about that. And I don't know if it would have changed anything if I knew that I could pass on genes for this disease or not. I don't know if that would have changed anything. I have no idea. I know people choose different things there. I don't know what I would have done. So yeah, they were really, I've never been taken so well care of as I was during my pregnancy, because I live in a country where we have universal healthcare and free healthcare. So many people are taking very well care of here, and me with my weird body has been kind of, they don't know what to do with me, so I've been like kind of pushed out to the sidelines. But then during my pregnancy, it was like, okay, we can take care of you now. So that was neat. So I can't really complain about that, except sometimes there are insecurities about how to deal with stuff kind of bled through. And then there was stuff because I wanted to have a natural birth. So we had a lot of discussion because of my blood pressure, and my heart rhythm is so unpredictable. We had a lot of discussions with the doctors what to do and how to react and stuff like that. And they were not agreeing. Like, one wanted to induce me early, like in week 36. And that was the problem with each time having a different doctor, that I didn't get continuous kind of, there were no consensus, if you understand. And that was a problem. But I know, like, people who have diabetes or have epilepsy and stuff, they often have one doctor through the whole pregnancy. So the plan gets more consistent. But for me, it was like that doctor's opinion that time. So after my birth, I found out that they actually had a plan pretty early on, but it was on paper and they didn't tell me. So that was not so. I was like, okay, why didn't you just tell me what you were thinking? So yeah, because when I got closer to my term, I got sicker, and my heart and my blood pressure kind of went all over the place. Then, because my midwife got me into the hospital, there were I think they were kind of certain about how to deal with me or my symptoms. So a lot of back and forth, and I ended up being at a hospital a little bit. And then I think one of the problems also was that I was so kind of really wanted a natural birth. So I think they were trying, and they were very kind of, they don't want to push C-section on anybody. So in my hospital papers, when I got them afterwards, I saw that they were planning for a C-section for very, very early. And they wanted me to take one, but they didn't tell me, which I kind of wished I have done, because then I would have time to mentally prepare. Because in the end, they were kind of, I was admitted to hospital. There were a lot of back and forth, and I'm not happy about being in hospital. So then they were like, okay, because in the end, they gave me the choice of a C-section or not. And I was really, really exhausted at that time. So I said, okay, I really want a natural birth. But then we're like, okay, if you faint during birth, you're going to end up with a C-section anyway. And I was fainting a lot at that time. So I was like, okay. So I said, okay, I want a C-section. That was really hard for me to do because I don't know. I think that when you live with a disability, there's so many things that you have to do in a different way or can't really do or whatever. Sometimes you just kind of, you want to do things like the way it's supposed to do, if you understand, which is kind of silly in itself because, yeah. So I ended up getting the night to sleep on it. The doctor she was one of the the top dogs there, and she let me sleep on it. But then the next day when I got to there was another doctor, and I got into room and I had worked up the courage to tell him, and I was really, really sleep deprived at that time. I was kind of at the pink elephant level. So I told him very quickly that I wanted a C-section, and he hadn't read my journal, or what is that English word for it too?
Chart? Your medical chart?
Yeah, that's chart. Yeah, because now I just translated from Norwegian, and that's journal is something else in English. He hadn't read my chart at all. So when I came in there and said, oh, I want a C-section, he was like, oh, we don't just give that to anybody. And I was like, yeah, but I was told yesterday that I was supposed to get one if I wanted to. Oh, no. And it's your fault. So we're going to wait a week. And I was told that if I decided for a C-section, I could get it next day. And he was a typical doctor, like nose up and looking down, and probably a nice guy, but he was kind of the stereotypical doctor. So, and I went out of there really mad, really, really mad. I was so mad. So I went into room, and I actually remember I fainted. I was sharing room with everyone, and she didn't see that I fainted. She just saw that I fell down. So she called the people to get there and help me up and everything. And I was so mad that I told them that I didn't faint. I told them I just fell over because I was so mad. I wanted to go out of there, and I had no, it was just like everything. I was just it's like the baby's in there. He's just going to stay in there, and I'm not going to deal with a hospital. I'm just going to get out of here. I'm not coming back. But then I was kind of lucky because my mother-in-law, she was working as a midwife at the hospital at that time. So she was not interfering in any way other than that time, because she came in and I think she saw how kind of in Norwegian is like the curtains fell down, like I was just like not reachable at all. I was just, yeah. So she went to that doctor and just carefully asked him, like, what's your plan? And then he said he was on his way to talk to me because he had actually read my script. Yeah. And saw that I was actually, it was I who was supposed to decide if I wanted a C-section, and he hadn't read through his note or anything like that. So it was his bad. So he told me that, and then I was supposed to come back the next day. And then I met a doctor who was much more senior than him. So she was like top tier. And then I told her that I wanted a C-section. And then she said, well, no, I'd said it was a C-section. So if I got into labor that day, they would just cut me up because now I was not going to be allowed a natural birth, which felt kind of awful. And then everybody was telling me, oh, it's such an easy way out and you're so lucky. And I don't think people know what a C-section is. It's not a natural way, to put it that way. But it's a good thing. It's a good option. But it's not an easy way out. Not at all. So, yeah. But I was like, then I had to spend the night at the hospital and in the morning. Yeah. But it's like, for me, who doesn't like hospital, it's you kind of feel it's a very hospitalized experience. You're kind of somewhat removed from it, if you understand. It's not your birth. I didn't feel like it was my birth. I felt like I
It's
know
being
I don't
done
I
to
just
you.
Yeah, I was just a patient. But the lucky thing was that since my mother-in-law was working at a hospital, she was allowed to be the midwife. And that kind of humanized it for me because I knew that she was going to be like the second or third person to hold our baby. And she was the one who was supposed to handle him and stuff. And that helped so much because it felt like it wasn't so afar, it felt closer and it felt more personal. So that was a really good thing, actually. So, and the C-section, I was cared so, like they had, this is a training hospital, so they have students and stuff. They had none students in there. It was just that like so they took my condition and they took everything very, very seriously. And they took really good care of me. So even like during the C-section, they have problems. Like it took some time for them to find my veins and stuff. And they couldn't they had to give up something because they couldn't my blood veins are not really good. So they just have to give up. But it was like when my husband came in and I react really badly to some medication like morphine and stuff. It's not good for my blood pressure. And they given me something. So I was kind of out in a loop. And then I was laying there and I was like, okay, the good thing about a C-section is that, yeah, I'm going to feel them handling me and stuff, but I'm not going to feel pain. And when they started cutting in me, I felt pain. Because of I don't react to pain medication the same way as many others do. So, and they had to use a different type because of my blood pressure and everything. So yeah. But then there were this other anesthesiologist doctor. There were two of them during the procedure. And one, she came just when I was under, and she stopped them because even though I couldn't speak, she spoke for me because she could read out of the results that something was wrong, that I was feeling it. So she stopped them. And I just remember thinking, you are God, I want to kiss you. Yeah, that was just kind of, it was wonderful because I felt so, like people, when I tell that story, they'll be like, oh, that's horrible. Yeah and no, because she saw me. She saw that I was in pain and she stopped the pain because stuff like that can happen. So some like, oh, you must be so like frustrated that happened. Like, no, because bodies are different. Stuff like that happened, but I was so well cared for in that moment because she stopped them and she said, no, she's feeling it, because I hadn't the word because I was totally out of it, but I still felt it. Then they did some more pain medication and stuff, and they started up again, and I still felt the knife going through, which was it was not a fun experience, I must admit. It was kind of I had some really bad dreams and had to like have a talk with a midwife afterwards because it was not fun. But still, she stopped them again, and she was like, yeah, protecting me in a way. So I felt kind of, yeah. So, and then when my boy got his head out, he was screaming his lungs out. So then I was intensely happy because then I knew everything was well. Because during the pregnancy, uh, with my body and everything, it's also this fear that for my baby, okay. I think every mothers have that. I think that's very common. I don't think that's unique at all. But I think if you're a disabled mom, you kind of feel it stronger. Especially me getting told during my pregnancy that part of your condition is actually like in your genes, in your DNA. Then it was kind of, yeah. So it's kind of really good to hear that he had such a strong set of lungs on him. So then I was really, really happy. But then I was also like, I couldn't even like move my fingers at that point because I was so sedated. And then because of my blood pressure and heart rhythm, like many, when they have like a C-section, they get a kid on top of them. They couldn't do that with me. They had to close me as quickly as possible. So he kind of went away. And then I went up to aftercare and I was without him for many hours. My husband came up for a short visit, but yeah. Now the hospital is now in a new building, so now everything is different. So if you get a C-section, you actually get the kid with you and you have like different type of rooms and you have aftercare in the room and everything. But it was not like that time. So I had to be in this, I don't know what the unit is called in English, but yeah. like recovery room. I don't remember. I don't know a better word for it. Yeah. So, but then afterwards, it was, I think my troubles concerning my disability came more afterwards because my body didn't react well, like my blood pressure and my heart rhythm, like from going to being pregnant and having the increased fluid volume. It was, everything got out of equilibrium, so everything got kind of thrown out, and I got all these weird symptoms, and they didn't know how to treat that. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I spent 9 days before I got out of there. And yeah, so then I was kind of on my own again when I was at the hospital. So that was kind of weird because, yeah, they took really good care of me when I was pregnant. But then right afterwards, it was kind of, okay, now we don't know what to do with you. You're on your own. Yeah.
So you were still in the hospital, but they discharged your son. So what was that
No,
like?
he was there with me. No, he was there
Oh, he
with me.
stayed with you.
So
Okay.
yeah, so he stayed with me, and also I was kind of lucky because I got a family room. So my husband was there a lot with me, and when he was not there with me, either my mother-in-law and my mother was there with me. So in the end, you're supposed to pay when you have your husband there, but because he was kind of, I couldn't stand on my feet at that time. It took me a very long time. It was just right at the end. I told them to like get some fluid into me so they could kind of get me fake better so I could get home. So then my husband was there and helping them a lot. So I couldn't get, at that time, I couldn't get transferred over to my wheelchair because I couldn't sit. I had to lay in bed because my blood pressure and everything was just on a wild ride. So it took a while before it was stabilizing. And I told him to like, okay, can you give me fluids because intravenous, because I know that can sometimes push my body into the right direction so I can kind of get into right track so I get back to my normal weird body instead of really out there weird body. That was, I think that was the hardest time. So I didn't see many of them during that time because they were coming in every day to just check that everything was okay, but we were kind of left to ourselves, which I didn't mind because I know they were busy and stuff, and I don't like being at a hospital, so kind of forgetting that I was at a hospital was kind of nice. But yeah, and then when I left, this was my first child. One of the ladies, which I actually I really liked her. She told me, "Oh, I hope we never see you here again," which was not so fun. Yeah, I was an older mom at that time, but still, that kind of, I carried that with me. The weird thing is, like, in the beginning, we got a lot of help with my in-laws because we were living in their apartment and everything there wasn't wheelchair accessible. So that was kind of tough. But even then, you kind of find, when you live with a disability, you're kind of used to finding solutions that kind of work. So I used like the floor to change him. I used like the sofa. I didn't use you find ways to solve things. And then I couldn't, and that was a weird thing because of medication I went on, I couldn't breastfeed. And then nobody could give me help with like bottle feeding because nobody knew how to do that. So I had to kind of research it, how to do it, like a lot, because there's so much focus here on like breastfeeding, and that's really important, but it's always a lot of people who can't. So I carried with me for a long time a lot of shame towards having a C-section, which everybody, oh, you're so lucky. It was like, no. And then also because I didn't breastfeed, because it's so, sometimes it feels like we connect so much of the value of becoming a mom if you can birth naturally and breastfeed. And if you don't, then you're kind of, oh, you're not doing the whole experience, but you're still a mom. You have still been pregnant. And as I said, a C-section is not the easy way out. There are quite a few layers to have to cut through. So,
And is he your only child, or do you have
yeah.
another?
No, he ended up being my only child, and a lot of that hindsight, okay, he didn't want to sleep, so that was one thing because he didn't sleep for like 9 years. Now he's 12, so he had a really bad case of fear of bed, so he just didn't sleep. But also with that, the comments I got during my pregnancy and also a bit afterwards, I kind of carried them with me. And then I was like, oh, I can take care of one. But in hindsight, a few years later, I realized that I actually wanted 2 children. But my own prejudices and others' opinion kind of weighed me down. Of course, could be with it, like, we would never get, but then we ended up, took us so long to get pregnant with one, so it probably wouldn't have happened even if we tried, but still. But I have one child, and he's a nice boy. He's on his way to be teenager, so it's going to be a bumpy ride, but that's the way it's supposed to be with teenagers. I think if it's not a bumpy ride, that's not a good thing. I think they're supposed to be a little bit, yeah.
Is there anything that you did during your pregnancy or wish you had known to like prepare for pregnancy and birth now that you look back?
I wish I knew about the C-section and that the doctors wanted me to have a C-section, because then I could mentally prepare myself. And I also would have then bought some good like underwear, because the ones I had was like hitting right into like the line of the wound, which was really painful. So I had to first use the very, very nice underwear you get from the hospital, which is just awful. I don't know how to describe them, but they look like giant diapers. Why? Yeah. So he had to go out and buy some for me. And also the same with like pants and stuff, like, because it's so hurtful. It takes a while. And also, if I know now there's a lot more information about C-section online, but at that time it was really hard to find anything, because it was so kind of, oh, but C-section, that's so nice. There's so little pain with it and stuff, and it's so easy. And it's not, because it takes a while. Like, I went to the doctor a year after, because I didn't have any like complications, but I still had the normal complications, like you loss of feeling, nerves that doesn't work, like you kind of get a little bit, not infection, but you still can get like a swelling and stuff. And that's quite normal without it being an infection. It's just that area is very, very sensitive. And I didn't know that. So when I went to the doctor, and she said, yeah, but this is normal. Everything you have experienced, it's real, but it's normal. But I couldn't find information about the consequences of C-section, and that it's not, yeah. So that was kind of, and all the other people I knew had basically had natural births, so I had kind of a different birth story from them. And also, we should know that I tried to find other people with disability during my pregnancy, but I couldn't at that time. So that was kind of a lonely experience. So if you can, I would advise people to get to know others in similar situations. It's kind of weird, because now, many years later, I'm now out of it. I was in this patient group at the hospital where we advise in the hospital, they call it like the women's center. It's basically about birth and obstetricians and stuff. And there's a huge department, and they established like this council of women who have been patient to kind of counsel the doctors and the leaders about all from like small stuff about codes for finding information to how people want to be met at birth and stuff. And now I lost my train of thought. But in that council, I was invited to this panel about how it is to give birth as a disabled woman. And at that time, there was easier to reach out online than it was 12 years ago. So I reached out, and people shared their story with me. Some did it on email or messenger, and some did it like on a phone call. And people were so forthcoming, and it was kind of weird, because there were different people. People had everything from like people being blind or having muscular dystrophy to ME, and like all different types of conditions. And also all different kinds of experience with that, how they were met, how they felt they were met, and if they were positive towards the history or if they were negative. But in the end, the stories was kind of similar still, because everybody, when you boil down to it, very few was met under disability. It was like the disability of them was a non-issue. So in the hospital at that time, the hospital here in Bergen was in a very old building. So it's very difficult if you had were using a wheelchair or having disability of movement and that sort of disability. So that meant when you were in hospital, you weren't going to need more help. Like when I was there overnight, there was not a wheelchair accessible toilet. Now it's totally different because now it's a new building, but it was like the people there was not aware of how the surrounding can actually increase a disability, because they were kind of, oh, you can't even get to the toilet. It was like, yeah, but home I can get to the toilet, because it's about the built surroundings. And for the people who had loss of vision, that issue was not so big, but still they were not met with the needs of their disability. Like one, she told me she had breast infections with all her children, except for the last one, because then the midwife kind of realized she was blind and taught her how to breastfeed in a different manner. So she didn't get a breast infection. And I think we kind of forget that disabled moms exist, and we give birth and we become moms, not necessarily in the same way as everybody else, but we do exist. But yeah, so at the hospital, I kind of felt the moms who had the most positive experience was the ones who were kind of best at hiding their disability. But the ones who had the worst experience was the ones who couldn't hide a disability, and then it was kind of met with, well, if you're going to be a mom, it's going to be a lot worse than this. And then maybe the hospital and the system around don't acknowledge how the physical surroundings actually increase or make a disability stronger. Yeah, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it was still kind of interesting to talk to all those women, because it was kind of interesting to see what we had in common. And because even though we had a blind mom and me in a wheelchair, that seems to be very vastly different disabilities, but we still had so many similarities in the experience of being a mom and the challenges we face, which can be sometimes hard to talk about, because I guess I'm always afraid of being kind of judged. Yeah. So I go between trying to be a super mom and being the best mom ever, and then realize I'm just a mom like everybody else. Yeah. So you kind of want to not admit to failure, and you don't want to give the people that were kind of skeptical, you want to prove them wrong in a way. And that's wrong to just think like that. But I don't think like that anymore. But in the beginning, it's sometimes, I don't know if you can kind of connect with that thought. Can you understand?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like you just want to, especially with doctor's appointments, or even when you're not pregnant, it's, well, I wonder how the person next door is treated, or everyone, do they ask these questions to others, or,
Yeah.
do they have these? So you get that even when you're not pregnant.
Yeah, and that was also something I was not aware that I was thinking. And that was a question I started just asking during the conversation I had with the people, because it was this fear of child protection service. And I realized that so many of us carry that with us. I was not conscious enough to ask those questions in the beginning, but it was kind of trickling through every conversation I had. And in the end, I started asking about it, because there were so many who have heard about somebody who was threatened. The child protective service was coming into the pictures, and especially people who asked for assistance and stuff. We were told if you can't take care of your own child or need an assistant to that, then you can't have the child. Then you have to go turn into the child protection service, and that was a very common fear for so many of us. And I didn't realize that I had it, but then I was kind of, because so many, I don't have any except for my husband. I don't have any assistants and stuff. I'm kind of managed on my own. And during those years, it was kind of people said, oh, you have to apply for assistance. And I was like, no, because then people will say I'm not capable enough to take care of my children. And also like the idea that I got like from older people and people saying, oh, it's so nice for you to get a little helper. Now you get your own little helper. And I didn't get my child to be a helper to me. He's my child.
Right.
I'm taking care of him and not the other way around. So that led to, because I have read there's not a lot of research about disabled moms and disabled mothers giving birth. One of them is actually Norwegian, and it's a few years old, but it was kind of interesting when I read it, because it's either the people who get really, really proud because their child is so helpful and so accommodating, or it's the super mom that was going to do everything, and the child is not going to do anything because nobody going to accuse you for making your own child into a helper. And I fell in that second category. Then I realized I have a son. I don't want him to end up with a spouse, no matter what the gender of the spouse, who despise him because he have never learned how to put his dishes away. So now at 12, I'm trying. I started last year a little bit, so I'm trying to learn him to do housework now. It's because I realized that's a skill, that's a life skill you actually need. Yes. But my fear of him being like labeled as, oh, he's doing this to be my little helper, kind of stopped me from. And I don't think, reading that research, I kind of figured out I'm not alone in doing that mistake.
That's some fears we have as well, as like the CPS and wanting to be their parent, making them out to be just an asset to us, but being their parent and parenting them. Yeah.
And I think it's a very common fear for a disabled mom, and I think that's why I wish I was kind of part of knew more disabled moms. So that's my advice to people who I think it's seek out others. It doesn't need to be the same disability as you have, because I think we have common grounds. When I talked to the moms who had either vision loss or was legally blind, I had a lot in common with them. Even though I'm a wheelchair user and have other bodily issues than them, we had still a lot in common, because we had so that was really nice, because when I talked to my friends, I had a friend who had babies at basically the same time, and we had somewhat of a similar experience. It was kind of nice to get into the mom club and be one of everybody else, but at the same time, it was bizarre because I was one of them, and at the same time, I was a little bit on the sideline. I was going to maternity groups and stuff. I had to have my husband with me because of stairs and everything, because the way we build our society, it's when you're a wheelchair user, it's not accessible everywhere. So I had to have him with me, and if he was not with me, I couldn't go there. So there were a lot of groups and stuff where I couldn't go along because it was inaccessible. But then at the same time, son, he hated to be into his wagon, no, bassineer. What's it called? The push. Bassinet. He hated that. So I had to have carry him. But that was kind of good. I could be in my electrical chair, having on my chest, and go on a hike with him, and that would work brilliant. It would be no problem at all. But a lot of groups for that was places where I couldn't go. Yeah. So it was, becoming a mom gave me a pause into a world of being more like people. So in some ways, I saw people when I become a mom that they were I became less of another. And at the same time, it was a really interesting experience, and it still is. But I think people's views of disabled people have changed the last 10 years. We are more put together into the diversity group. Before that, we were something of others, even though like we are the largest minority in the world and most are not visible disabled. They're still disabled, but they're not visible. So, yeah. So no, I think the vast majority of people, when I saw how I kind of handled it and stuff, I haven't gotten I got more negative feedback during my pregnancy than I got afterwards, if you understand. Yeah. Maybe because afterwards I think, oh, maybe she was out for an accident and poor her. Because when I was pregnant, people said, oh, is disabled and she chose to be pregnant. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Or could be that I chose to not see the people giving me negative feedback because as a mom, I kind of chose to see the people that smile at you and are kind of nice, and the people that don't, you kind of push away. I must have like in daycare, there was a situation like we chose a daycare that was very inaccessible for me, but we chose this because it was the closest one, but it was also like a lot of like trees and climbing and hills and stuff. And here in Norway, we're hiker people, and I was that when I was young. I loved to go and hike and climbing and being outdoors, and I couldn't give him that experience. And my husband is not very interested in going out to the woods. So choosing that daycare was kind of my way to give him that experience. But when I came to fetch him in that daycare, I couldn't go like the other parents into the forest to get him because it was inaccessible. Even though I had a very outdoorsy electric chair, it was too bumpy up there, so it was impossible for me. And then some of the people working there were kind of very nice. And some of them were more, they never said anything, but it kind of sometimes, well, most of them were really, really nice, but you can kind of feel, I don't know, annoyed, is that the word? Maybe kind of a little judgy, but then it kind of chose to like, okay, whatever, it is what it is. But I wonder if you take disabled people like moms from like the system in the United States is so different than here, but I wonder how much of a similarity you still will find in the experienced.
Yeah, I think that's the fun in this podcast is that I hear from people all over, and there's still similarities even from different parts of the world. So, and we still experience the same problems of CPS and being judgy and doctors with questions. So
yeah, it was like the first time when I went to the doctor. Like I said, I waited for a year for that appointment. And all he was concerned about was my ability to care for the child. And of course, saying questions marks about it, that's understandable. Using the whole hour, it wasn't even an hour because appointments are so short, about talking about my ability to care for the child. What I was asking about is my pregnancy. Am I going to be able to carry a child healthy to term? Because that was my question. I don't want to carry a child that's going to be sick no matter what I do, because I think there's a lot of discussion about stuff like that. But for me, it was kind of important to know that I could carry a child healthy to term. So yeah, I wouldn't hurt the baby. Of course, everything can happen and things can happen no matter what. But I kind of wanted to give it the best kind of starting point as I could give it. And if I wasn't able to carry it to term, then I wouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't really, I don't know how to formulate the words, but he didn't answer that questions at all, because he was just preoccupied about my way to be a mom. And my husband wasn't with me by that time. Was like, but I have a husband. Would you have the same question if I was here as a perfectly healthy single mom? And it was kind of interesting because at that time I had friends who went to Denmark to like get a sperm donor and was going to be pregnant as a single mom. And my view was that if I got so sick, because it could turn the other way, that I would get so sick from the pregnancy and everything, that I would be totally depending on assistance from other 100%. And then I told my husband, like, but then you're going to be a single dad and I'm just going to remove myself to a care facility or whatever. That was my reasoning then. I didn't realize how strong the mother bond is, so it would not have been easy. But that was but still, the doctor was more, he talked more about like my, how impossible it would be for me to be a mom than the pregnancy itself. And I remember was that was one of the worst doctor appointments I've had. And that was actually also the doctor that didn't read the entry into the about my C-section. So that was the doctor who said, "Oh, you don't need a C-section." That was the doctor that got me to see kind of black at the hospital. So a bit too sure of himself. But then I've heard, when I talk to people, I heard people had like what would consider like a very large type of disabilities who were never talked out of getting pregnant, like having muscular dystrophy and stuff, and having like you can move one arm, and the doctors were always on board with them and stuff like that. So I think it depends on the doctor. But then I've heard others who have like low vision, and the doctor said, "Oh, you cannot be a mom." So I think it depends. And for me, they were not very on board before I got pregnant. But as I said, when I got pregnant, I think they were like, "Okay, now the damage is done." So, but it's a hard choice to take. It is harder to make that choice when you have a disability. Some disabled people are like, "Oh, we have the same right." Yeah, we do, but it's still a harder choice to take because there's so many. Like if you are a woman, you don't have any visible disability, people will pressure you to get pregnant. And if you have a visible disability or a well-known disability, people would kind of not talk about it. I had all those years. There was one person who asked, and she has a sister who also uses a wheelchair, and she's like, "Why don't you try to have a child? Why don't you have a child?" And she was the only one who like kind of asked me that question, but otherwise never, none. And that's kind of interesting in itself.
Right. So to wrap up, I guess, what is there any place that people can connect with you if they want? If you're open to that?
Yeah, I have an Instagram called Accessible Bergen. And I'm also now on TikTok. I don't have many followers on any of those platforms, but yeah, with the same name, Accessible Bergen. So yeah. So because I'm kind of over the average interested in accessibility and universal design. So that's my kind of, I do a lot of like volunteer work and also like consulting work about those topics.
Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. I could relate to a lot of it, and I think others can too. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us.
I hope it was not too much of a rant. I was trying to like figure out the words and everything, but sometimes today I'm thinking a lot of Norwegian, so I was doing a lot of translation into my head, and it kind of went into a.
No, it's fine. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.